Hello and welcome to the Providence College podcast. My name is Joe Carr. Our guest today is Father David Orique, a Dominican friar who is a member of the Providence College history faculty. Father is also director of Latin American and Latino studies here at PC. Father, welcome to the podcast and thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy to talk with you and your listeners.
I suspect you've had July 2019 circled on your calendar for quite a while because you're the lead organizer on two conferences coming up later this month on campus. The International Conference on Bartolome de Las Casas, July 15th and 16th, and starting the very next day, PC will host the third International Conference on the history of the Order of Preachers, the Dominicans, through Friday the 19th. So give us a sense of the scale of these events and the type of scholars and participants that they will bring to PC.
First of all, the Las Casas Conference, this will be the second we've done here at PC, and we're hoping to do one every 3 years. The Dominicans in the Americas, that we have had two previous ones, one in Mexico City and one in Bogota. And the Dominicans in the Americas, we cover, if you will, everything from Argentina to Alaska, those who work on anything related to the Dominican order. The Las Casas Conference is the first 2 days, and we have a bit of a day of rest, if you will, on Wednesday, and then we do 2 more days of the Dominicans in the Americas. And I have had these circled in my calendar for a long time because, like anything, this takes time to plan these things, takes time for people to be able to marshal their resources, economic and intellectual and so forth, what they're going to need to come here. Some people are traveling for quite a long distance. In the case of some of them are traveling as far as this one scholar coming from Japan, a number of them coming from Europe. There's a whole host of them, a cluster of them coming from Chile and Argentina. Those are the sort of extremes of distances that people are traveling to be here for these two conferences.
What sort of academic disciplines do they represent? Would give us a sense of the breadth of backgrounds that people who are attending these conferences have?
Well, the usual suspects, at least if you think of Providence College or the Dominicans, history, philosophy, theology. Of course, we're also doing literature, people doing art, architecture, a whole host of things. It's really quite rich. The program is also going to be online at the Mission and Ministry website, so if people wanted to actually look at the program and see the specific people who are coming. We did have a much larger contingency of people coming, closer to 100. Right now we're going to be at around 80 as far as the participants. But again, because of the distance, the logistics, and other issues, it's not always that easy to come to the U.S. or to travel abroad.
For a lot of people, New England in the summer is a pretty nice place to be, right?
Oh, yes. Especially people come from Argentina. This may be counterintuitive to those of you who haven't traveled south, but if you go to Argentina or Australia, we're in summer now, but it's wintertime, say, in the southern hemisphere. So the people coming up from Argentina are coming up for some warm weather.
Sounds good. So these conferences share some common themes, with one being fairly obvious, and that is that De Las Casas is a seminal figure in Dominican history, and you certainly qualify as an expert, having written your doctoral dissertation about him. Tell us more about this person, his life, and his impact.
Well, Las Casas, there were a number of early Dominicans that came here. If we think in terms of the Dominican history in the Americas, not America meaning the United States, but the Americas, the first Dominicans arrived in this hemisphere in 1510. Las Casas wasn't a Dominican at the time. He became a Dominican a little bit later, but he's one of these early Dominican figures in that early 16th century period, long before there were European inhabitants from this part of North America where we're broadcasting from in New England. And so Las Casas is one of these figures. And he's little known in the English-speaking world because a lot of his work has not been translated into English, although some of that's happening. There are 14 volumes of his collected works, which is really quite extensive. And there are a lot of scholars that are working on this, on Las Casas. I didn't realize how many there were until we started hosting these conferences. We have a few people repeating from the last conference. We have another whole cluster that I didn't even know that existed. So when you send out a call for papers or you let people know you're going to do a conference, you start to get emails and not so much phone calls today, maybe in a text if people have your way to text you that way. But then you begin to discourse and dialogue with these people. So it's very fascinating. So a lot of people work on Las Casas. He was a bishop. He was a diocesan cleric. Then he joined the Dominicans. Then he ended up becoming a bishop in what's known in the southern state of Mexico and northern Guatemala today, which was called the Diocese of Chiappa, not this confused with the modern state of Mexico called Chiapas. And he was a theologian, a philosopher, a jurist. Some people use the term a human rights activist. That's really a modern term. Some people have even used the term liberation theologian. I don't think that's accurate either, because that's a modern term applied to him. Although you can look back and see he was clearly active in favor of indigenous rights, and then later on for African rights too. He's one of the few. There are two Dominicans in the 16th century that denounced the African slave trade. He's one of them, although he's associated with initial advocacy of bringing African slaves here, but he wasn't the first to replace those who were doing the work for to try to save the indigenous, right? But later on, he repented of that and became a fierce advocate of African rights denouncing African slavery, along with another Dominican who was a Portuguese Dominican, since there are a lot of Portuguese in this area here. Fernando Oliveira was a Dominican in the 16th century, also denounced the African slave trade. Pretty unusual in that time because most people were pretty much on board with that. But they're some of the earliest sort of denouncers of African slavery. And of course, denouncing the abuses against the indigenous people. And Las Casas would be part of that cluster. He's not the only one. There are a lot of other Dominicans that are involved in that. But like any good family, there are different sides of the story. We've got some heroes in there. We've got some others that are a little more, to be polite, more colorful, that maybe weren't necessarily in favor of what he was advocating for. Not just on the clerical side, but also in the civil side.
For evidence of his stature in Dominican history, we need look no further than the St. Dominic Chapel here on campus, as he's depicted in one of the beautiful Sylvia Nicholas stained glass windows right here in our chapel.
That's right. I mean, they can even get online and see that stained glass window. And if they come to St. Dominic's Chapel, I encourage them to look at those lateral windows on the left and the right. When they come in, they can see some other saints of the Americas. You'll also see Juan Macias, and you'll also see Rose of Lima, and of course Martin de Porres, and there are a few other saints that I think people would want to take a look at. Although I must caution that Las Casas is not canonized, but we do have a window to him. But his process started a number of years ago. I was contacted by the postulator for that for the Diocese of Madrid, Spain, in collaboration with the Diocese of Seville, Spain, where Las Casas was born. So it's in process. They're working on it. But these things take time, and many people argue a lot of money, unless someone just declares them a saint. I think he'd be a great one to declare for a lot of reasons, but we'll see.
Well, it's great you've been asked for your input on this.
I did. I was at I don't know how the process works, all the details of it, but I was asked to. They sent you a series of questions about 10 years ago, and I went through all those questions and responded to them. I had to write them in Spanish because the postulators are in Spain.
Interesting. So scholarship in a general sense is central to the 800-year history of the Dominican order. But what is it about the order and the people who are in it and the Dominican approach that associates it so closely with scholarship?
Well, I just give the quick answer to that. One of the things I'd like to remind people is that more of the order's history is outside of Europe than it is within Europe. And very frequently, I think when we think of the Dominicans, we think of maybe a medieval or a 14th century flowering of like a maybe Savonarola, or maybe Thomas Aquinas or Albert the Great, a few of these other notable, or for some people maybe notorious Dominicans from the medieval period. But the bulk of the Dominican history, if we go from 1510 forward, we've had more of the history of the order, and there are more Dominicans, increasingly more Dominicans outside of Europe than there are in Europe. But to go back to your original question about the intellectual character or the academic character of the order, at least in Europe, at the founding of what we would call today the modern university system, the Dominicans were some of these early itinerant scholars that went to these universities to begin to engage those communities. And so very early on, they went by two. Dominic sent them out early to go to these university settings, whether it was in Bologna or it was in Salamanca or Paris or Oxford or Coimbra, which is in Portugal, and there are a number of other sites, Évora in Portugal as well. At least in Europe, that's in that early foundation of the flourishing of the early European university system as we understand it today. In many ways, we echo that clearly, the organization of the modern university in the United States, particularly here at Providence College. Even the Dominicans were inserted in that very early on. Of course, we know there are a lot of other academic orders in the Catholic Church as well, but Dominicans are one of them. Not the largest, not the most broadly representative. I think the Jesuits clearly got it. They've got everybody beat on that one. So,
let's talk a little bit about your pathway to Providence College. You and Father Gumbert are unique among the Dominicans in our community in that you represent the western province of the Dominicans in the United States. What is it that brought you across the country to PC?
Unique, I guess you could probably say. Well, I entered the Dominicans at 32, and I had a commercial banking career, but I was always, I just had this vision of working in academia. it would not go away. And even though I entered a little later, I got a later start on my doctoral work. I was 44 when I got started, and I finished at 50. And while I was doing my doctoral work, additional master's and another doctorate in addition to master's, I got to know Father Ed Cleary, and he knew my interest in Latin America and Spanish-speaking countries, which would include Spain, at least to Europe. There are some other Spanish-speaking countries that are not in Europe and not in Latin America. But he would bring me here. I get a chance to meet people, and it just began more and more attractive to me. So when the position opened up as I was finishing, I came here. To be honest with you, I had kind of hoped to stay on the West Coast, but I'm very grateful I came here. This has been much more than I had imagined. I guess we're used to what we know, and you want to stay with that. And it would have been easier in some of the ways to stay there, but it's been well beyond what I imagined coming here, all for the good. And but those are kind of some of the basic reasons why I came here. So,
Father Cleary, I suspect most people listening to us know this, but Father Cleary was a longtime member of the political science faculty here at PC, and of course beloved by generations of students and who became alumni and others. And what a great connection.
Yeah. What's interesting about Ed Cleary, he died almost 8 years ago. It'd be November of this November will be 8 years. He died in 2011. And he left a number of projects unfinished, and I've been able to finish. We're finishing the third one. Shortly before he died, he signed a contract with Oxford University Press for a large volume on Latin American Christianity. So it's the Oxford Handbook of Latin American Christianity. So I was asked to lead that project along with two others of his acolytes, people that he had mentored. And we're finishing that now. As a matter of fact, back in my desk, the Priory here on campus is a big stack of galley proofs, about 600 pages worth, and I'm working through it along with my co-editors to bring that to fruition. So here is a man, a Dominican, who published, this will be his 15th book, at least associated with him. He didn't have a chance to really get this thing really going. He signed the contract and knew what he wanted to do. And we're finishing that. We're seeing that to conclusion. Here he's almost 8 years deceased, and he continues to have a fruitful life as a Dominican. And it was a very, very fruitful scholar. He had worked in Latin America for 52 years. And this is a little personal anecdote. This is a little inside the way I kind of think. This is very sort of an intimate kind of little story I'll share with your listeners. It's meaningful to me. He had traveled to every Latin American country, and the first country he went to was Bolivia back in the early 50s. And this year, that was the last country, and I was very intentional on my part, the last of the Latin American countries that I had planned to go was going to be Bolivia. And while I was cleaning out his room, that was left for me to do when he passed away, which took quite a while because Ed was, he just collected everything, and probably a lot of people of his generation. And I was going through there, and I found his ID card with his picture on as a young Father Ed Cleary, Dominican priest. And I took that with me when I was in Bolivia. So I took him back to Bolivia. And And then one last thing that I need to do in addition to finish this volume that he had signed is to go visit his grave where he was buried in Chicago. He was from the Central Province, and that'll perhaps bring some sort of round out that story. I knew Ed for, I met him shortly after they ordered, so I've knew him for 24 years.
Well, his legacy is assured thanks in large part to your work.
Well, I don't know about, anyway, these are big shoes to fill. We all stand on the shoulders of others that have taught us a lot of things, so it's all about gratitude and acknowledging the help that other people give us. No one does it alone. Nobody does it alone. Even the quote-unquote self-made person is, someone else has helped them get where they are.
Let's pick up on the theme of travel. You talk about being in all these Latin American countries. I say visiting. What I really mean is working in them. Tell us more about the way you've lived out your vocation in various parts of the Americas and places you've been and the kinds of things that you've done.
Well, I'm multilingual. I grew up, my father is Portuguese. I grew up here in Portuguese, and I've continued to study Portuguese. And then I've been around Spanish all my life. My parents had a small farm in Central California, a lot of Spanish speakers there. I worked a lot with farm laborers, but of course the language of Spanish is spoken a lot of places here in Rhode Island. I hear it a great deal, even here on campus. We have a lot of multilingual or bilingual students here. So I've studied Spanish. I did a master's in Spanish literature. I've also just been studying Spanish, since I was in primary education. I think it was 8th or 9th grade I started studying Spanish. I've continued formally, and I continue to read and study and use it every day. But that's one of these to lead to the travel. I mean, if you can speak a language, that's one of the ways that opens up doors for you to be able to travel, live and work and be in different places. And what's the most recent trip that I was just on in May, visiting the Dominicans in Paraguay, then Bolivia, and then I stopped in Costa Rica on the way back. You go from Argentina, and I've also been to Alaska, where the Dominican staff the cathedral there, and we have a mass in Spanish there. So you can literally go from Alaska to Argentina, or Argentina to Alaska, and find places where you can speak Spanish. And there's a lot of variety, as there are in the English-speaking world, tremendous amount of variety. Even though you have a common language, you have a lot of different cultures that are wrapped up in that, a lot of different uses of the language, as we would all know if we heard someone from Australia or Ireland or Scotland or Canada or South Africa or Nigeria or Kenya. Or India, we're all speaking English, but we're not all the same culture. So we have a vehicle that unites us that might allow us to travel and mingle with different groups of people, but that doesn't mean we necessarily think the same. But anyway, so that's opened doors. I spent a year in Salamanca, Spain, studying, which is very much connected with Las Casas and my interest in the Dominicans, particularly the flourishing in the 16th century of the Dominicans, that a lot of them who came to the Americas and did some very interesting work. The Dominicans, again, they arrived in this hemisphere in 1510, and they came, that would be in the Caribbean, and what's today the Dominican Republic. And there are a lot of Dominicans here, not Dominican friars, but people from the Dominican Republic that live here in the Northeast, lots of them, and that's very much connected with the Dominicans. And then also, of course, they landed on the mainland in 1526, and they went south to what's today Oaxaca, Mexico, and there's really quite an impressive material culture and legacy there of the Dominicans in churches and in music. Of course, the fact that the area is Christianized in the sense of the Catholic tradition. Lots of other things I could tell you, but that gives you a little taste of those things.
And of course, this meshes perfectly with your academic specialty. You can see how this all fits together.
Well, it's something I get fired up about. I mean, I don't know much for your listeners, but it's something that gets me up early in the morning, keeps me up late at night, and something that's propelled me through a lot of things in life. And one of the things I don't want to forget to mention is that Saint Dominic, the founder of the Dominican Orders, he spoke Spanish. They would have called it Castilian, and even in central Spain today, they generally call it Castellano. We call it Spanish, but it would have been intelligible as to today. So it's the language, the maternal language, if you will, of the order. So
I'd like to go back just a little bit to California and Oregon. You mentioned growing up in an agricultural community. What form of agriculture? What kind of crops? And tell me a little more about your family and what took you from California later to Oregon.
Well, I grew up in Central California, and if you will, California, think of California as really 5 states. I mean, I think here, or those of you who are listening from the East Coast, perhaps, or maybe elsewhere, we can project a lot of stereotypes about California. I didn't grow up in part of the state where there were, convertibles and surfboards. I grew up as pickups and rifle racks, that kind of thing. It's a little more of the Midwest of California. It's rural, it's agrarian, it's conservative socially and generally politically. But my parents had a small vineyard, and we did have some livestock. And then my father also had a union job with a dairy processing plant. My family, from my Portuguese grandparents who migrated to this country, very much involved in the dairy industry. Still have cousins involved in the dairy industry. I come from a family of 7. I'm the next to the youngest. I'm the only one that of my siblings that have done as much advanced study as I have. Most of my siblings, 3 of them are professionals, but out of the others, I'm the one that's done the most education, and I'm the only one that's, say, cleric or involved in sort of service directly in the institutional church. But then I lived in Oregon, and California, and I moved to the Bay Area and worked in commercial banking. Met the Dominicans there at St. Dominic's in San Francisco, which is a church worth visiting if you're in San Francisco. It's quite beautiful. And it just, if you will, that's the rest of the story is I entered the Dominicans, and then my first assignment was to Central Oregon. In Eugene, Oregon, it's the 3rd largest city in Oregon. It's quite beautiful there. I go back twice a year, go back at the holidays. It's kind of my home now, if you will, because since my parents have both passed, I feel like my center is more where I was kind of raised or grew up as a priest. It's my first assignment as a priest. Lots of families connected there. Matter of fact, when I go back in the end of July, first part of August, I have at least 2 baptisms. And so, I mean, a lot of the couples that have done their weddings are having children now, or they're having their third or second or third child. So I just did one, and was back in June just really quickly for a short trip, the baptism, and I'll be back out, and then I visit a lot of people. I'm out there. In addition to staying with the Dominicans, the Dominican staff, the campus ministry at the University of Oregon.
Well, it's been obvious to me in our conversations off and on over the years that you're very close to your family, and it's great that you're able to get back there and visit with them and have such an impact on their lives. It's a nice thing. To the extent you're comfortable sharing it, would you tell us a little more about how and when you discerned your calling to the priesthood? You're working in commercial banking and make a major turn in your life.
Well, that's a great question. Even as a kid, I was kind of teased about being a priest. I never know how these things work. I mean, I think if anyone has a real quick answer for any of these things, I think sometimes be careful. But I guess the broad answer is God called me. I think the more sort of proximate response was that I just felt like there was something else I was supposed to be doing in my life, and I couldn't quite figure it out. I think any of us, I was talking to a student this morning who just got back. She was a Smith Fellow. Shannon Moore went to Argentina. I prompted her, or encouraged her to apply. She had to earn it on her own merits, but just to see how that transformed her life. And I was talking to her this morning. I said, Shannon, wherever you do, find something that gets you up early in the morning and keeps you up late at night, and you're excited to do it every day. It's still going to be hard. It's still going to be challenging. It's still going to be at times painful. And I can say that's very true of the call to the priesthood. I entered at 32, and I've never thought, what if? I can honestly tell you I've never had second thoughts. But I've lived with priests and others, and I've seen where they've had second thoughts. I entered at 32. I don't know if that's the thing, or if it's just more of the deeper sense of the vocation or the calling. I think most of us, I'm sure most of your listeners who can manage to download a podcast could probably get a job, and probably most of them have careers. But I think what God is calling us to is to find what is our calling, what are we wired for, that will help us to be fruitful and flourish, and to make a positive impact in the lives of other people. So I think that vocation takes time to discern, whether we're called to married life or single life or some other direct service in the institutional church. But at least for me, I just felt like there was something else, and I kept asking and I kept trying things. And to be honest with you, not that I think marriage is bad. There were a couple of times you want the personal stuff, right? I'll give you the personal meaty stuff here. Yeah, there were 2 times it was very seriously. I was twice engaged, but there was something not there. I couldn't quite explain it. It was something telling me you're not supposed to get married. And I'm heterosexual, and I'm very comfortable with celibacy. It's not always easy, but I'm very comfortable. It's kind of the way I'm wired. I don't know how to explain it other than just to kind of talk a little bit about it.
Oh, it's nicely said. Thank you for sharing that with us. So do you enjoy living in New England?
I do. I'll be honest, when I first got here, it was really hard for me because it's a big adjustment. I made an adjustment. I was 50 years old. You're in a certain area for a while and you get to know people and you plug in, you've got your social circles, and it's taken time to build a sense of the social capital and the relationships, and that's now starting to flourish. It just takes time. I'm grateful that I have a Dominican community to live with, so I didn't have to go off and be by myself alone in an apartment, but it still takes time. There are different ways of thinking about things, different way of understanding the world, different cultural cues that sometimes I just took time to get. I kind of understood those in other places, but I didn't understand them here, and I've had to learn them. But it's anytime you travel, those of the people who have traveled, if you haven't, if you can read broadly, read good literature, it stretches you out and makes you more emotionally and psychologically flexible and ability to adapt to different situations. So it's forced me to read in a different way of the world around here. But yes, it's been good. You asked me it's like you asked me what time it was. I told you on Bell Watch, right? I gave you a longer answer than you wanted.
That's the way podcasts work, Father. That's good. That's what they're for. So we appreciate that. And we're glad you're here. I mean, it does not seem like you're a fish out of water at all. So that's great. Once again, these conferences are coming up in the middle of July. The International Conference on Bartolome de Las Casas, July 15th and 16th. And then later that week, the Third International Conference on the History of the Order of the Preachers. And Father Orique is the lead organizer on both. Takes a major effort to put together activities and events like this. Let's thank some people who have helped you. I know that you've had some great colleagues.
Well, I just say lead organizer. I guess maybe the point person. This is a team effort. And I don't just say that in a cliched kind of way, but there's so many people that have been helpful. I'm really grateful to the college. First of all, the college has been very supportive of this, starting with Father Shanley and Father Ken Sicard have been very supportive, very much encouraged this. Center for Catholic and Dominican Studies has been very helpful over there. Of course, Lisa Medeiros, who works over there, she's been extraordinarily helpful. And just other people on campus. As Director of Latin American Studies, I don't have a support staff. I just kind of do everything myself. But I also go around and ask people. I cadge for money. I cadge for help. And, of course, we're charging people to come here. They're not coming on for free. A few people you comp, but for different reasons. But, there are a lot of people you thank. Just thankful for you and the other people who have taken some interest in this. So.
Well, it's a wonderful thing.
For Tara Baxter. Oh my gosh, Tara Baxter has been enormously helpful in this, and
college events.
Better be careful. Right? My gosh, if she's listening to this, I forget to thank her. She's going to have my head. But many other people too.
Sure, it's a feather in the cap of the college, I think, to have activities like this, and these in particular here during the summer.
The staff here at Providence College is really very, very professional and on top of stuff. It's very impressive.
A great place to be, that's for sure. And Father David, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a lot of fun. Your story is an interesting one. You've got some great activities in front of you in the remainder of the month of July. We hope it goes perfectly, and then you get some rest.
All right, thank you very much. It's been great talking to you.
Father David Orique has been our guest today, and we thank you for joining us. You can subscribe to the Providence College podcast at all the usual places, and they're available on the college's YouTube channel. Feedback is welcome at podcast@providence.edu. Thanks to our producer, Chris Judge. I'm Joe Carr. Until next time.